count on getting 80%.
That's right.
Chetwynd, Prince Rupert.
The British Columbia Development Corporation has invested approximately $90 million to date and has created 4,000 permanent jobs, plus more to come.
The British Columbia Development Corporation is an important component in our economic recovery plan. It will assist industry and business in creating new jobs in every part of our province.
While recession is a reality we all face, BC is planning and working now for recovery.
BCTV.
Good morning. I've got to be very careful with my introduction today in case I ask the wrong questions to the wrong people. Did you belt your kid today?
No, did you beat your wife?
This is not, of course, involved with belting kids. This is John Fryer, the John Fryer of the BCGEU and NUPG. And I want to know from John if he's in town to put the hammer on and make dramatic announcements about an instant settlement of this pesky little BCIT strike and other allied matters with the leader of the biggest union, certainly most members working in British Columbia. After that, I'm going to meet Dr. David Thomas and his charming daughter, and maybe his wife too, because Dr. Thomas is the chairman of the Child Restraint Committee of the BC Medical Association, and that's why the question, did you belt your kid today? And for a political flavour, who comes back to appear in my program, hasn't been here for years, but ERNIE Hall, NDP fellow from Surrey. He's actually, in a way, I suppose, Van der Zam's not bedmate, but sidekick. They split that riding together. And he wants to make some serious accusations against the expenditure of public money. Did I not say Dr. Smith? I said Dr. Thomas. It's one of these mornings, John. It's Dr. Smith. And ERNIE Hall's going to be talking about social credit expenditure of public money for what he regards as party political polls, the nits, he says. And I'll be back with John Fryer, for sure, after the break. Seems funny that the BCGEU settled its problems with the provincial government, but here's this kind of sideline strike, on again, off again, of 350 BCGEU members at the BCIT institution. And I'm just going to ask John Fryer right now, I presume you came back to intervene directly in the negotiations and settle the strike to your satisfaction.
Well, not to intervene directly in the negotiations, but one of the reasons that I'm in BC this week is to take a look at that whole BCIT situation, and I spent yesterday morning on the picket line talking to the people, and I've had a meeting with our key officers last night to review the situation, and we're going to crank up the dispute.
Now, what do you mean crank up the dispute? It was on again, off again. What is it now? On again?
Well, it's
for sure?
on now, but the students are crossing our picket lines. Virtually all the faculty members are crossing our picket lines, and that has to stop. And so we're going to have to do a number of things. I think we'll probably start some mass picketing. And
well, that's rather threatening, Mr. Fryer. Surely a student, if he feels so inclined, can go through that picket line to his classroom if he wishes. Mm-hmm. His whole career is at stake.
Well, I don't think his whole career is at stake, because if the faculty would respect our picket lines for 1 or 2 days, the dispute would be over.
Well, I understand the president of the Faculty Association quit last night on that very point.
Yeah.
But how are you going to force the faculty to, you're going to bully them out of their jobs?
Well, we're not going to necessarily bully them out of their jobs, but we're going to make them realize the severity of making a decision to cross a legal picket line in the province of British Columbia. We can't allow picket lines, the sanctity of the picket line, to go down the tube because some teachers think that it has to. So.
But the sanctity of a picket line is only as sanctityful as it's legal.
Well, it's perfectly legal. Our picket line is legal, and
mass picketing is legal in this province?
I think the type of mass picketing we have in mind. But anyhow, we're going to crank it up, and there's some other things we're going to do some more publicity on the outrageously high salaries that the people we're dealing with are earning, and are sitting across the table from us and telling our people who earn on the average about $1,000 a month take home that there's no money at all for them, but there's lots of increases for these high-priced help.
Is it true that your average salary, in fact, for your people at BCIT is $18,500?
Gross.
Gross. And they'll be receiving 70% strike pay?
Yes.
Because you've got that massive strike fund you didn't use, about $3 or $4 million.
Oh, lots more than that. We can afford to keep the people on strike for the next 5 years, but that's not the purpose of the whole exercise. The purpose of the exercise is to get the dispute settled.
No, but are you being, that's a tough statement, but are you being reasonable in today's climate, whereby we know perfectly well there ain't the money in the bank to meet everybody's full-scale demands, and your original demands was something like, I think they were about between 14 and 18%.
That's correct. That's our original position. You know, the starting point in negotiations. The management at BCIT has consistently refused to this very point to offer 1 cent in a wage increase. So until we get an offer on the table, we're not going to negotiate away from our opening position. But as I say, the employer at BCIT says there's absolutely no money for wage increases for our members. There was money for wage increases for the faculty. There was money for wage increases for the high-priced help, some of whom make over $80,000 a year. But suddenly, there's no money for the workers. And we're not going to accept that under any circumstances. The 14-15% figure is obviously negotiable. And
are you suggesting to me that during the course of and over the same time span that they gave their top people substantial increases?
Well, they've had raises. Somebody better than I can give you the exact timetable of the raises, but for example, there's been merit increases for their senior people, which has brought them up by another $6,000 or $7,000 on top of that list of salaries that you already have there.
Are these figures correct?
Plus $6,000 or $7,000.
So you're saying that Gordon Tom, the president of BCIT, now gets somewhere around $85,000, $86,000?
That's correct.
And Svetic?
The other guy we negotiate with is 70-odd.
$73,000 more or less.
Right, so we think he should find a way of making a wage offer to the employees who are the administrative support staff at the institution. And we're prepared to negotiate, but we're not going to accept a zero, well, people use this term zero wage increase. Zero is not an increase, so we're not going to accept zero wages, period.
Is this agreement a replica of your master BCGEU agreement? Is that what you're going for? Well,
it isn't a replica, but because we recognize the special circumstances at the Institute, and therefore there are differences, but substantial parts of it are similar. So that's the answer.
The word from you on the BCIT strike is it is now on.
Yep.
There's going to be mass picketing, and are you determined that the faculty will not go into the classrooms?
We would like, if possible, to try and find a way of stopping the faculty from scabbing our strike, because
they're not unionists.
Yes, they are. They're a certified bargaining unit in a thing called the BCIT Staff Society. They're a certified bargaining unit under the Province of Labour of British Columbia, under the Labour Code of British Columbia. And we believe that getting union certification carries with it certain obligations, and one of them is to respect the legal picket lines of other unions. And we'd like them to start behaving in a proper fashion, and if we have to nudge them along a bit, we'll do so.
Will you pay them strike pay if they refuse to cross your picket lines?
We could discuss that with them.
Because
I'm certainly not. I wouldn't be totally averse to that.
I mean, the point being that your people on the picket lines get strike pay, and you're asking the faculty to say, stay away, lose your pay.
Well, I haven't said. Well, as I say, I would be prepared to consider that. I have no, there's no real problem with us. If we can, if the faculty will respect our legal picket lines, the institution will grind to a halt. The moment it grinds to a halt, this rather reactionary administration at the institution, which is taking such a hard line with our people, I think their attitudes will change. But as long as they can keep those, the faculty in the institution and the students, then they can maintain the sort of outward image of business as usual to a substantial extent.
The only place they can save money is though by cutting the highest-priced help, because obviously if Curtis and Victoria says, that's it and no more.
Well, they could also do it by changing or by proclaiming a piece of the BCIT Act which would allow the government to give them a subsidy to operate, but that's another...
John, they got no money. We're a billion something in the hole, bankrupt. I mean, the BC... No,
Oh,
not
you
bankrupt.
mean, I don't think... Well, I don't believe the government is bankrupt, and even if the government is bankrupt, well, whatever.
$1.6 billion deficit.
Okay. Well, so we've got a bit of a deficit. Now, all of a sudden in Ottawa, we're told that the deficit is not that bad. Ian Sinclair, the president of CPR and or CPR Enterprises, the chairman of the Prime Minister Trudeau's 6 and 5 task force, says we need a massive increase in the deficit in order to stimulate employment. So,
Okay, bad news for BCIT, students and faculty and the strikers as well. We'll turn to some other topics and then we'll go to the phones, but first some other topics with John Fryer after the break. John Fryer, BCGEU. Do you accept the assurances of Chabot and Curtis and company in this famous letter that went out?
Yes.
That there is no intention to have mass layoffs, and are you happy with the policies of the government in reducing by attrition?
well, obviously, well, let me start at the beginning. We met with Mr. Chabot and we met with the Premier, and we had a frank discussion about their financial concerns and about where they feel the size of the government service needs to go. And I believe that we have a commitment from the Premier that there are going to be no mass layoffs in the government service of British Columbia. And I accept his word on that. We cannot stop, nor I believe should we be able to stop the government from reassigning priorities. And if a person leaves in Department A and they'd rather fill the vacancy in Department B rather than Department A, we don't have any argument about that. We have certain contractual protection whereby workloads cannot be unilaterally increased for our people, so that we've got some contractual protection. And if the government wants to reduce the size of the workforce through attrition, I think that that's something that it's possible for them to do. Whether or not it's wise for them to do it, which programs specifically they intend to starve of funds and people, I don't know. And of course, that'll take on a whole character when it starts to happen.
But that's got to be their choice because they sign the paychecks, really.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Now, how many people do you expect to lose? Is it a massive number over the next 3-4 years?
I don't think so, but because I don't believe in many places you can allow the workforce to decrease by attrition. If I could use an example, you can't allow the workforce at Ocala to decline through attrition. Either you're going to have the right number of people on those tiers or you're not. And if you don't have them, you've got problems. So even though somebody quits, you can't say, oh, well, we'll go short-staffed for 2 or 3 days.
This is a matter of interest. Okay, supposing they have 10 people, 10 shortages at Ocala.
Yes.
Does your contract insist that they must take people presently in the government service who are going to be laid off and make them Ocala guards?
No, it doesn't. It does not at this point in time. Although what it does do is it provides for retraining and relocation of people from place A to place B in the event there's to be a permanent reduction in place A. And these are all options that we're looking at and all options that we're going to work on. So yes, there will be some relocation and some retraining of people.
And you'll object to outside hiring if you've got people being laid off in other departments?
Absolutely. In fact, more than that, we're quite angry about the fact that recently the Public Service Commission has relaxed its residency requirement. In other words, previously it was almost compulsory. It wasn't legally compulsory, but it was a virtual practice that you had to be a resident of British Columbia for 1 year before you got a job with the public service. They've now, in November, the Public Service Commission relaxed that rule and said we want ministries to understand that this is not a rule, and that when you're writing to people out of province and inviting them to come to work in British Columbia, you mustn't let them feel that they have to meet this residency requirement. Well, I think it's madness at this particular time.
I mean, I have another thing
to bring people in from Toronto and other parts of the country when we've got hundreds of thousands of unemployed people here at home.
Now, you and I have had our differences, but let me put something to you that surely one thing you should be campaigning for, this is redneck, is we checked the Burnaby Motor Vehicle Branch. 5 out of 7 of the inspectors were ex-policemen with pensions. You go to BC Ferries, you go to many of these government operations, you'll find guys with good index pensions picking up government jobs. Do you object to that? Because I do.
I don't object to it in the sense that if they've earned their pensions through another career, I don't think we as society should say they don't have the right to work anywhere else when they get, even though they have a pension.
Maybe they shouldn't have a right to work in public service building up another pension.
But certainly under the old Social Credit Administration, like the W.A.C. Bennett administration, during a particularly heated dispute we had regarding the liquor stores, the then chairman of the Public Service Commission told us across the table that it was conscious government policy in the Victoria area at the time to only hire into the liquor board people who retired with other pensions, because there would be less pressure for wage increases from people who already had incomes. So I don't think it's like that today, but it used to be years ago.
It's not good policy in hard times, is it?
No, it isn't, but I don't want us to single out people who've got to
I understand.
have had previous careers.
You were given in your new contract a promise by the government that I think you'd get 1,500 auxiliary workers enrolled into the permanent force with is it 2 or 3 year protection they have once they're on?
With 3 year, it would be for the new ones, 3 year protection.
Has Bennett kept his word on that?
Yep, he has, or the government has. There was a heck of a lot of checking to do to find out just how many of these longer-term auxiliaries there actually were on the payroll. When the computer sheets were finally produced, we found that there were 1,596 people who had been with the government as auxiliaries for more than 2 years. And of that 1,596, of course, our collective agreement will give job security, permanent job security, to 1,500.
So this year?
1,000 are in the process right at this moment, and another 500 in April. So 1,500 out of 1,596 is pretty good.
And I presume you're gearing up to help the NDP in the forthcoming election, which must come in 1983 by all common sense.
I don't believe that necessarily there will be an election in 1983.
Well, gearing up for 1984.
Well, I've answered the question in the way I'm going to answer it.
Are you firm and dedicated in your political objectives to remove that social credit government and replace it with that much more generous government represented by a former cabinet minister sitting here in the hall, the NDP?
Our union is non-partisan.
Is this the John Fryer I know?
Well, that's what our union constitution says, and...
that's not necessarily Fryer, but that's a union.
Well, sure.
Your questions to John Fryer after the break. First call to John Fryer is from a BCIT student. I don't know which side of the fence he's on, but go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Fryer.
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you understand the real situation with the students out there, and that you're a little saying that the strike will probably only last 2 days. Doesn't really give us much of a guarantee as to if you pull them out, we will probably lose 4 months of our education time.
For missing 2 days of classes?
2 days? How do you know it's going to go 2 days?
Well, why don't we try 2 days and see if I'm right?
Well, what kind of a guarantee is that for us? When
Well,
we are
if I'm-
putting on
if
the
I'm-
line, if you'll just hold
Yes,
on.
sorry, okay.
What we're putting on the line is approximately $5,000 invested each year into our education, of which the university has right in their constitution that if in any way our education is interrupted by means beyond their control, that we do not get any reimbursement of our fees, and we do not get our credit for the 4 months. It'll probably be the 4 months from January to April that will have been disrupted. And who knows how long of a disruption it will take.
Okay, hold on.
Allow us not to get our credit.
Did you modify your position to say you're going to try a 2-day test?
I think if we had a couple of days of the Institute completely shut down, we would things would start to happen in Victoria. But, of course, that's my view, and maybe they would leave the Institute shut down for months. I don't think so. But the other point I think that students have to understand, and understand well, and that is that those institutions, such as BCIT, and the cost of their education is paid in very large part by the taxes that come out of the pockets of the people walking those picket lines. And if they don't earn decent wages, then the government can't extract from them decent taxes to pay for very fine institutions such as BCIT. You have some incredibly good facilities there, paid for not by student fees but by taxpayers' money, and those people walking that line
Are part of that money.
Are part of that money. and I believe deserve your support.
Okay, I gather
One more
that.
thing. Just one more thing.
Go on.
I agree, Mr. Fryer, with what you say there, but can I just say that maybe instead of leaving the students out in the cold, if you could get together and talk to whoever the president of the Student
Sure.
Association at BCIT and
Sure.
get them to understand what's going on, and maybe there can be some kind of an
Sure.
agreement. Otherwise, you can have an explosive situation out there with students
Yep.
against your picket
Yep.
line and the whole bit.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think that we should have a meeting with the students, and I would hope as many students as possible would come, and we can really talk this stuff out. I agree with that entirely.
Go ahead to John Fryer.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Fryer, I was locked out of the boiler house by BCIT when we started to shut down the plant before we went on strike to avoid any danger to anyone.
Yes?
Now, after only a half an hour, the management had thrown us out and handed the boiler house over to a couple of scabs that they had just hired to break the strike and also changed the locks on the doors.
Yep.
Now, I thought there was a law in BC against using professional strike breakers. They gave these scabs one-year appointments at $4,000 a month. Now, that's $96,000 a year that could have been put on the table for in negotiations for a wage increase.
Do you know what you're talking about?
Yes, he does. He's absolutely right.
$4,000 a month.
This is a station engineer that worked in the boiler house at BCIT. In anticipation of the strike, the administration locked these people out and then has hired scabs at $4,000 a month, plus steak dinners and goodness knows what else, to run the boiler house for the duration of the strike so that the students and the faculty keep nice and warm in the building. Now, that sort of thing is not going to be tolerated in British Columbia.
Is that against the labor law? If you cannot import strike breakers, I know that from the States.
The legislation regarding the use of professional strike breakers in British Columbia was stronger in the Labour Code before the amendments that the current government made some 2 or 3 years ago. But it's one of the concerns that we have about the deliberate attempt by the administration at BCIT to break a legal strike and run non-union, and we're going to stop it. And that's what I'm talking about, escalating the dispute. We are going to stop that from happening.
Well, I mean, you can call them scabs if you like. I suppose they're technically hired as administration personnel on the... They must
Now,
be.
what do you mean call them scabs if you like? They lock people out of a boiler house, stationary engineers. They go on the street and they hire other stationary engineers for $4,000 a month to do the work of the workers legally on strike. That is scabbing. Those people are scabs. And it's not a question of calling them what you like. You tell me what you'd call them.
Well, if I were on your side of the fence, I'd call them scabs.
What would you call them?
If I were running
an objective reporter.
If I were running BCIT and I was determined to keep that place going, I would try to pick from within my staff people who are qualified to run
No,
it.
but there aren't people on your staff qualified with holding the appropriate stationary engineer tickets.
I wouldn't call them scabs, I'd call them blacklegs.
Okay, fair enough. You got a deal. It's good enough.
Go ahead, please.
John, I'm a librarian at BCIT, and I've been respecting your pickets because I work so closely with your members. I just want to apologize for so many of my colleagues who are crossing and prolonging this dispute. I hope that your members won't tar all Staff Society members with the same brush.
No, and I appreciate you saying that, and I hoped I was reasonably careful. The vast majority of Staff Society members are crossing the picket line, but for example, there's this lady here. There was a gentleman I spoke to on Willingdon yesterday. He's a member of the faculty in the math department. He's got his van there. He's making hot coffee and soup and sandwiches for the striker.
So touched.
No, but listen, there's a principle involved. And if these teachers keep crossing that picket line now in a deliberate attempt to get to work with the administration at BCIT to break our strike, we'll get even. I mean, we're not going to just let that happen and behave like nothing happened, Jack. You don't side with employers in a deliberate attempt to break a legal strike in this province and not pay the price.
John Fryer, I was present at a discussion of very many distinguished people in the labour movement last night, and the thesis was proposed that the current union leadership in British Columbia, in all segments, are a new breed who have not been through the heat of the bad old days, and that the current leadership, no names, no pack drill, are blinded by the fact that they're faced with reality, and if there isn't any money, there are times when they got to give. Maybe you're in that position now.
I don't
Maybe
think
you
so.
got to give.
Well, okay, that's different. Yeah, but I mean,
The
there's a whole.
cornucopia is empty at the moment.
Well, but you know, I mean, I know some of the people you were with, and I don't want to name them, but you know, I think that it's.
These are my views, right?
No, but I think it's a little bit sloppy to talk in terms of the go-go years of the 1970s, as some of those people you were talking to have done to describe labour relations in this province. I don't want to go back to the 1930s. All right, the people that my family came through the 1930s, and they didn't want to go back to the 1930s, and I don't know anybody that does want to go back to the 1930s. When we dealt with the government last year, we knew there was much less money available than we felt we were properly entitled to. We had a case, we felt, for a significant catch-up raise. When we got to the bargaining table, that money simply wasn't there, so we did our very best to spread around what there was in as fair a way as possible, and I think that we behaved very responsibly in that regard. So I don't accept the criticism that all Labour leaders can't handle the current situation.
Position now at BCIT is that you've had no offer.
Not a penny.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, John.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm on strike at BCIT, but we went back to work last weekend to demonstrate good faith and mediation.
Yep.
You know, I went to night school to the BCIT to meet some classmates, and they weren't sure if they were whether or not to honor the line or last time they were picketing.
Yep. Yeah, I know. That's something that I'm going to be talking to Jim Kinnaird and the Federation of Labour about. There's a large evening student population at British Columbia Institute of Technology, and some of those evening students, many of them, are members of other unions during their daytime jobs, like they work at BC.Tel or they work somewhere else. And we're going to be talking to the Federation of Labour because I'm going to ask the Fed to ask its affiliates to make sure that those of their members that are students at BCIT respect those lines.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Fryer.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I worked for the provincial government for 6 months, and as a result I got canned there. I worked at the Glendale Laundry in Victoria.
Why did you get canned?
Well, I kept putting in grievances because after about 3 months, they started giving me abuse and saying I was a lousy worker.
Well, look, I don't want to talk about your grievance.
Yeah, I know, but just a minute, because I think this is very important. I'd like to know, what's the use of the union when I've gone down there to go to bat on it, and I told the union in Victoria what was going to happen, and as a result, I got fired.
Hold on. Can't handle that,
I don't
John.
know about the case.
Take it up with your people. Phone Robbie Robinson.
No, he should call Don Burns in our Victoria office, who spends more time at the Glendale Laundry trying to solve problems there than he spends it with most of our other members.
Hold on, please. More with John Fryer after the break. Up here.
Oh, yeah.
John Fryer, BCGEU. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm a student at BCIT in the computer system technology. And personally, I don't like to cross the line. But the faculty keep on insisting that if I miss more than 10% of my term, that I will fail the course. I know that management haven't offered the BCGEU members any money at all. But if this goes on much longer, I will blow my whole term. Is there anything a student can do in order to speed up its bargaining process?
Okay, short answer, John.
Well, I think that the best thing that we can do is if the students would vote to support our strike, and then we can persuade the faculty to vote to support our strike, I think that'll bring the thing to an end.
Go ahead, please.
But I think it's incredible, Jack, that you've got faculty members crossing our legal strike, going in there and then telling students that they have to be there as well and that they shouldn't respect that line.
There just ain't no solidarity no more.
Well, it certainly isn't with some of these more professional people, quote unquote.
One of your problems, of course, is that even union members today don't have the old-fashioned trade union philosophy, do they?
They do not.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm a BCGEU member, and I've been with the government for 4 or 5 years now, and for the last 4 years I've watched everybody else in the provincial economy get 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and this is the usual beef. The BCGEU has taken 8, 8, 8, and now 6. We're going to be back at the bargaining table in a matter of 8 months. When are we going to get a fair settlement, and at what point is John Fryer and the leadership of this union going to get militant? And if we don't get a fair offer and a fair settlement, shut the whole province down, as the IWA or the Pulp and Paper or every other union that's got any backbone does.
John?
Well, don't know where to start. To shut the whole province down and do what? Bring the people of the province to their knees? Is that the strategy?
Well,
well, let's understand it. When the IWA goes on strike in an economic struggle, or when the pulp workers go on a strike in an economic struggle, they go on strike in order to try and hurt very significantly the owners and the shareholders of the forest companies in this province. When we go on an all-out strike, the people that we are hurting the most are the people of the province, and they happen to be our employer, and we happen to have responsibilities to them, and therefore the type of strike weapon that is perfectly appropriate and the type of strike that is perfectly appropriate when you're dealing with a manufacturing industry or a mine where you're dealing with inanimate objects is one thing. That type of strike is not appropriate, and I repeat, not appropriate when you're dealing with the delivery of services to human beings who need them. And you therefore have to use, if you have any responsibility at all, different techniques. And I reject the one-out, all-out concept, and I shall continue to reject it. And in order to have one of those types of general strikes where we try and bring the province to its knees, you'll have to get rid of me.
Well, look at the situation in Quebec now. There's a threat of 250,000 unionists defying legislation and coming out, it would seem, in orderly rote.
Yeah, well,
can you support that?
I support it. I support it because they are going to provide for the provision of essential services down there, and I also support it because the government of Quebec deliberately provoked that dispute, and the way that they deliberately provoked it was not by refusing a fair wage increase or a 10 or a 12% wage increase, whatever this person is concerned about, but by taking 20% off the people's paycheck and rolling their paychecks back by 20%. That's what prompted it.
And this was done by the social democrat pragmatist Levesque, who says he's close to bankruptcy.
Well, I don't believe René Levesque is a social democratic pragmatist, but it was done by the PQ government, and yes, they're in severe financial problems. But the fact remains, and just to get to the point, that you don't use the same tactics when you're dealing with people as you do when you're dealing with trees.
Because Mac and Blow can always go bankrupt.
Of course they can.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
That's you, ma'am.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I'm Fryer.
Hi.
I have a question about the last BCGEU contract. I'm a former BCGEU member.
Okay.
In that I got laid off 2 months ago after our wonderful contract. And my understanding is that although you negotiated perhaps a fairer contract for 1,500 auxiliary employees, that the rest who were left in the bundle were also let go in a haphazard fashion, which is that auxiliary employees are employed or taken on with term dates.
Yes.
And they came and went in that order of their term dates, having nothing to do with how long they had actually been in employment. For instance, the office that I worked in was almost 50% auxiliary employees. My job was replaced by an auxiliary employee who just walked off the street 2 weeks before the freeze. I'd like you to respond to that.
Well, I don't know the particular details of the situation, but our auxiliary workers have seniority provisions within the collective agreement. If their term is not renewed for whatever reason, their seniority, as a result of the last collective agreement, they retain for 9 months, whereas before the old contract they only retained it for 6 months. So you should sit down with a staff representative, talk about the specific situation that you find yourself in, and let's find out whether there's been a violation of the contract, because I don't think that it's usual for the government to bring somebody off the street after they've already laid somebody off, because we can fight that. But I'd have to have the details. I don't have the details.
They were brought off the street after someone was laid off. People are brought on to auxiliary in May, June, July, whatever month for a certain period of time.
Yes.
I was replaced by someone whose auxiliary date went until March 31st, who obtained that job 2 weeks before the freeze.
Okay, ma'am, but you're going to have to take that up with your staff rep.
We have to get all the specific details of it, and whether or not there's been a violation of the collective agreement, or whether or not there's been a violation of a variety of policies, we'll have to. I'm more than happy to look into it, but I can't. I just, off the top of my head, I'm not going to give you commitments that I can't deliver on.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm one of the students who happens to be honoring the picket line. There are a few of us.
Yes, there are.
And I think, the Staff Society is being a little bit two-faced. And the fact that it's not that long ago they asked that the whole administration of BCIT be put under trusteeship for a number of things, incompetency and very strange priorities. You know, it's interesting that Tom can do away with the clerical work for everybody else, but he himself needs 2 secretaries. There's also a thing that under this period of restraint, he's hired a new organizational administrator for the business section, and nobody quite knows what he's doing because it's fairly well organized there.
Are you telling me the Faculty Association had a vote of no confidence in the administration or something like
previously, that? Previously, but now they're, you know, at one with them.
Okay,
yeah,
one more.
There's also a few things, too, rather when you look at the students, I think you have to look at the fact that BCIT is a management training institute. Let's not be under any illusion.
Right on.
Okay, then.
Thank you.
No, that's very true, Jack. Its history was that it was set up during the days of W.A.C. Bennett as a management training institute.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. And the fact is, however, that students are viewing, you know, hoping that they're going to go into management streams, which is all fine. And nobody, certainly not in our union at any rate, wants to interrupt that education process. But there's a morale problem there, and there's a legal strike there, and we've got to bring it to a head.
One more short segment with John after the break. One of the interested audience at the unveiling of the Billy bonds, the BC Development bonds, is bound to be you, John Fryer, because you're going to get a couple of $8 million worth of bonds as part of your settlements.
Well, I'm not. I don't think I'll be at the event on Monday. But you're right that part of our settlement is in the form of two bonds, 2 economic development bonds, and we've had meetings recently, and my understanding is that they'll be distributed with the paychecks in a registered mail in about 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks. We don't know whether they're going to be worth $8 million.
Oh, absolutely. They sure. We do. We absolutely do know that they will be bearer bonds and that they will be worth $8 million plus, because we're hoping that the interest rate on our bonds is going to be a little higher because we don't need a tax deduction.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Fryer.
Yes.
Could you answer 2 questions for me? First off,
Try to.
if BCIT has the rotating strikes, will that include all government employees?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, is there any truth to the article on CJOR yesterday as to the fact that the government wants a secret ballot as to outvote the union?
The answer on the first one is that the BCIT is a separate bargaining unit under the Labour Code of British Columbia, and therefore the dispute will not involve the people who work directly for the provincial government, the other members of the union, in the sense that they're not in a legal strike position. I am not aware of any effort to vote out the union, nor am I worried about any effort to vote out the union, because under the present laws of British Columbia, a group of workers, if they don't like their union, have the right to decertify it under certain circumstances. And certainly visiting the picket line and talking to our members at BCIT, I didn't find people who wanted out of the union. I found people who wanted to get back to work, and they want to get back to work with a decent settlement. And the problem at the BCIT, in the BCIT dispute, is the administration at that institute, not our members or the union.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning, Mr. Fryer.
Yes.
My wife has been a member of the union for 8 years now.
Yes.
And a couple of points I'd like to ask you. Speaking of residency, who pays your flights and expenses while you come to Victoria? Why aren't you a resident of BC?
Well, I have a residence in BC, but I'm also serving a term as president of a national union of provincial government employees that ties together provincial government employees across the country, and the head office is in Ottawa. And so what we do is we divide between the national union budget and the BCGEU budget. We divide the travel costs.
I see. Another point. Recently, my wife received in the mail a financial statement.
Yes.
And to me, some of the charges to me were absolutely outrageous.
What sort of things?
Well, like automobiles, convention attending, these days of economy, My wife doesn't have a company car. She goes to work in the bus.
Yeah.
As do most of the employees, or they drive their own cars. What is the justification for so much money in spending in automobiles, furniture, and so forth? In fact, what I'd like you to do, if it's possible, is for you and Mr. Webster, maybe one day in a show, to maybe explain that to us and just give some justification for the outlay of union money.
Okay, he's suggesting that the union
let me deal
is extravagant.
let me deal with the question of company cars. British Columbia is a big province. We have a limited number of staff people. So, for example, we have a fellow in Terrace. His territory goes all the way from Burns Lake to the Queen Charlottes and up to the Yukon border. In order to cover that territory, which is a massive area, he needs a vehicle. So we provide for him a vehicle to drive and visit the membership up the Stuart-Cassiar Highway, etc. In Victoria, for example, our staff representatives, their territory goes up to Nanaimo. So, and into Cowichan and on down to Ucluelet and the Essaouista Peninsula. So we provide them with vehicles, and unfortunately the provision of vehicles for people today and gas and insurance is a costly business.
You plead not guilty to charges of extravagance.
No. I think that, however, that in these days of economic difficulties, we have an obligation within the union to trim our financial sales as tightly as we humanly can. And in fact, one of the series of meetings I've been having this week with our people is ways of cutting down on our budget and ways of trimming expenditures. And we're going to put together a program in which we're going to really try and trim any fat that might be in the system. And I'm not going to argue that over years fat doesn't get into the system, because it does. But we're conscious of the type of concern that this caller has, and I, for one, am going to be very rigid in trimming back on it.
Did I ask you what percentage increase you gave to your staff representatives and your salaried people in BCGEU?
You did not. Their collective agreement expires on March the 31st. I don't think it's proper for me to negotiate with them on the air, but it's quite simple. They will get the same as the members got, not 1 penny more, and that's the way it's going to be.
Are they a certified separate?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Of money for furniture, both for last year and the year before, and for convention spending.
Convention, look, now a convention is a very expensive proposition. We have to bring 400 or 500 delegates from all over the province. We bring them together for a convention on a Friday and a Saturday. It means that in most cases we have to book them off work on Fridays. It's very expensive.
I'm on the system, all right, in interrupting.
Okay.
His wife should ask the questions at union meetings and send me a copy of any documents which she thinks embarrass you. I'd be delighted to use them on the air.
Sure.
Fair enough. Your union meeting somewhere else.
All right, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yes, okay.
Here are you sitting on this program this morning and saying you're going to get your own back in that faculty association, you're going to mass picket the place, you're going to close down BCIT, you're going to wreck the whole damn thing. And he phones up because his wife is complaining about your furniture expenses.
Well, it's her dues, and she has a right to know.
Do it at the union meeting.
Okay.
We're concerned with the public interest, right?
All right.
Go ahead, please. You get the point, John.
Okay, you sure? I'm not fighting with you.
Go ahead, John.
Mr. Fryer.
Yes.
I find it extremely frightening listening to your views on people crossing picket lines about how you're going to make them pay and make sure that they don't do it.
Try to.
I've listened to this sort of rhetoric in England and Great Britain. I think they've brought Great Britain to its knees. I think the unions in Canada are heading in the same direction. It's really very frightening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just isn't true that unions have brought Britain to its knees. There's been a number of other problems that Britain has had. And it isn't true that unions in Canada are powerful. In fact, if anything, unions in Canada are weaker than in any other country in the Western world, with perhaps the exception of the United States. So unfortunately, these things aren't true. I may sound threatening, and I don't apologize for it. I am not going to, without a fight, allow a group of overpriced, high-priced bureaucrats break a legal strike of the support staff at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. I'm going to do everything humanly possible to stop it.
But you are prepared to make a reasonable settlement?
Of course we are.
Within your own guidelines at the other place?
Of course we are.
Most of these students that have worked through summer, through last year to pay for their education, I know one who is a widow with 2 young children, who, if she does not complete this term, you know, she's got to start, do the whole thing over again.
So why doesn't she just take the 2 or 3 days off that it takes to get this thing settled?
I don't know that it's only going to take 2 or 3 days.
That's right,
Well,
ma'am.
why don't you, you know, I mean, fair enough, but I've spent 22 years as a professional person in labor relations, and I'm telling you as a professional advisor in labor relations, 2 or 3 days and the whole atmosphere out there will change with the administration, and that's what we'd like to see happen.
Today is Thursday, the 27th of February.
Yes, sir.
A month. All-out strike.
Oh, I think it'll be over within a month.
We'll see who's right, Webster or
Yeah.
Fryer. The professional or the amateur. After the break, the doctors.
You've just seen the same crushing force that your body would have on your child's if you were both thrown into the dashboard of your vehicle at only 30 miles per hour. But you know, it doesn't have to be that way if you were both properly buckled up.